James, really good to see you. We often speak when you're either in Gaza or somewhere else in the Middle East, trying to get much needed aid to all of the desperate people who need it. But just on the talk of ceasefire, I mean, our correspondent there laid it out, just how difficult this whole process is. We're 21 months into this war now, or whatever you want to call it. And frankly, it doesn't feel like we are any closer to reaching the end of this.
No, yeah, and it's really problematic too to hear. I mean, to hear this idea that aid flows if there's a ceasefire. I mean, the idea that mums and dads and children are being denied the most basics for survival, and we are talking the most basics for survival. We're talking water, we're talking food, we're talking hygiene kits, we're talking medicines. The idea that that is tied to a ceasefire is deeply problematic. And under any sense of international law, under any sense of decency for a population under bombardment, they need the basics for survival. So that should not be held to as part of a deal that we're waiting for. And every other aspect, of course, we want to see a ceasefire. Mums and dads want to promise their children they'll go to bed and wake up. Mums in Israel want their sons to go home who are hostages living somewhere. It ticks every single box. As we saw, Yalda, just a couple of months ago, humanitarian aid has to do a couple of things. It has to go to where people need it, and you have to look at the evidence to make sure that that aid is ensuring malnutrition drops and access to water increases. That's what happened in the ceasefire. 400 distribution points. That's not what's happening now. We are now seeing this horrible collision in a child's body of a lack of food, a lack of water, and that is a lethal mix for girls and boys beyond what happens day after day from the sky.
Yeah, absolutely horrific, some of the stories that you've told us in the past. You were in Gaza about 3 weeks ago and you told us a story of a young boy who was killed trying to get aid. And frankly, this is now a daily occurrence for dozens of people trying to get food. I was told by someone, you arrive at the aid distribution point early and you risk getting killed. You arrive late, you risk getting killed. You arrive on time, you risk getting killed.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that we have seen something set up that is worse than anyone's possible scenario, and it's making humanitarian aid, the access, making it much more difficult. It's an incredibly dangerous place for children, for anyone to try and seek aid. And Yalda, there's a lot of times people will say, look, can't the UN do something? It seems like it's there to stay. Can't the UN do something? The simple fact is that, firstly, we had a very good system in place, and that was, 400 distribution points. The other thing is that because this site is alongside a militarised zone, people have to go through a militarised zone. If an organisation like UNICEF says, OK, well, we want to try and support and we'll put hygiene kits there or water there or something, then you are still pushing people down a militarised zone. And the next time there is a mass casualty event, which will be tomorrow or the next day, then we've been a party to that. So firstly, under no circumstances can we push people into where there are soldiers. And of course, on the other side, it's not about, isn't it better than nothing? Because it's a false equivalent. There was not nothing. There was 400 distribution points. UNICEF was going door to door. So it's a dangerous setup for people on the ground. It's horrific, the idea that you are being starved somewhere and then scrambling to survive and shot at. And at the same time, Yalda, it's a terribly dangerous precedent. There are other, wars around the world where groups will look and go, oh, so we don't need the United Nations. We can choose who we give food to. That should worry world leaders and member states. But too many member states have been unconcerned by grave violations against children in Gaza.
Talk us through the fact that, you, as you say, were in Gaza. Are your aid trucks able to get in? I mean, obviously, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a group, a body newly formed, created by Israel and the United States, and you have criticised the process, as have up to 170 other aid agencies. But in terms of what you guys are doing currently in Gaza, are you able to get some trucks in? Are you still able to have these distribution points?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So yes, in part, and I was lucky enough. Part of my work never leaves you. The sense of seeing wounds of war on girls and boys, seeing a little girl, talking to her who's paralysed, little Jenna, and her explaining to me in her own voice as she lay there paralysed after an airstrike on her school at 7 o'clock in the morning while brushing her teeth, lying there watching her friend die. Those images, those sounds will never leave me. But Yalda, I also see distribution points. I see grandmothers and mothers with malnourished children getting that therapeutic food from UNICEF, and that is an utter inspiration. But we know it's not nearly enough. There's no way we are getting enough trucks in. Right now, it's around 1 to 5% of the trucks going in. There is enough food on the border of Israel to feed 1 million people for 4 months. So again,
and it's just sitting there.
It's just sitting there. And these denials, we cannot normalise this. We can't normalise this idea that a population is deprived of food. Yes, you will hear arguments all the time of looting and aid diversion, and we should talk about those. Looting, very clearly, looting happens when there is mass deprivation. And, if a portion of London received nothing apart from bombs for 2.5 months, and then, down a certain street they allowed a few trucks, there would be looting because there'd be, people are desperate. During the ceasefire.
And this idea that Hamas is weaponising the aid as well, accessing it, and as you say, there are accusations from the Israeli side that criminal elements are there as well. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really important. So that aid diversion, UNICEF has asked time and again, just for the evidence, show us the evidence. We're a last mile distributor, and what that means is that we follow the aid, the vaccine into a child's arm, the food into a child's mouth. We have third-party monitors. This is not the first war zone we've worked in which has a lack of law and order. At no point have we been shown the evidence. At no point. Now, beyond the evidence, there's logic. Okay, so all this aid diversion that allegedly from Hamas with no evidence, but what about hygiene kits for women? What about tents and shelters? What about oxygen? What about incubators? We've got incubators that are on the wrong side of the border, and pregnant mums who give birth because they are stressed and having premature babies, those children are dying. So that's food, but then you look at water. We are at the most critical level we've ever been in terms of water. But water goes from the source to a recipient. There's no middle person, so how on earth can there possibly be a justification to have a level of deprivation of water to ensure that every single person in Gaza is below an emergency threshold?
And what is that then leading to? Because, of course, there have been warnings about diseases and things like meningitis for the longest time. The last time we spoke, and you just come out of Gaza, you spoke about the issue of water and meningitis, for example.
Yes, well, it's a really pertinent point, Yalda. So right now, as of today and yesterday, we're seeing very worrying spikes in meningitis. Polio is still active in the water system, we see in the tests. So they are two very, very lethal diseases that should worry everyone. Cholera, we've seen no cholera outbreak. If we see a cholera outbreak, then, the level of child mortality that we see from the skies, from the bombardment, can be matched. These things are all, again, utterly preventable. The access to food, the access to water is political. It's not logistical. And yet, as I talk of this and think of the idea of how many children are at risk, I realise that as we talk nutrition and water, still this idea that, a girl and boy are killed every single hour since the horrors of October 7, every single hour. So in the last 7 days, 168 children. The idea that doesn't have member states up in arms and just saying enough, at what point can we keep throwing international humanitarian law out the door? But that's where we are, a girl and boy, a mum, an auntie, a dad, grieving over that child, as we said, that little 13-year-old boy who I will never forget because his dad was in tears as this boy bravely told his story, and his mum furious with this medical evacuation form, knowing that it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, as her little boy, this brave boy Yalda, who sat up and held my arm because he wanted to tell his story, that dignity of a 13-year-old. Those children are dying as you and I speak. It's utterly pointless, and it continues.
Are you hopeful this is going to come to an end anytime soon? And what more do you think the international community could have frankly done over the course of the last 20 months, which they haven't done?
Yeah, it's a great question. Am I hopeful? As a Palestinian said, we have to be hopeful, but it's not a strategy. There is no doubt Palestinians are very, very well aware of politics, and it's quite depressing and revealing when I've had Palestinians say, look, James, we understand the level of outpouring of, support for us around the world, but it's still matched by impunity, and we know that international humanitarian law doesn't apply to us. So Palestinians are no fools when it comes to the perilous position they're in, but there's not a single person you talk to tonight, even though they know it seems far away, who would not be holding on. They have nothing else to hold on to because, as we know, not only does it mean an end to bombardments, it apparently means that aid will only flow if there is a ceasefire. So they know that their sustenance, their survival is linked to that as well. What else could member states have done? So much. UNICEF we have the benefit of being a frontline organisation. We talk to those in power and we have conversations with organisations like yours who clearly care. But member states have many tools in their toolkit, and I think what's important here is that this is not a nice principle to have. On a practical level, member states, if they're aware that a fellow member state is committing grave violations against children, then they bear a responsibility to uphold international law and to ensure they have no political, diplomatic, financial, military support. That hasn't been happening, and Palestinians are losing because of that. And it worries me greatly because international humanitarian law is something for generations that's helped all of us around the world.
James Elder, really great to have you here in person and not just be talking to you whilst you're dealing with all of this in Gaza. Thank you so much.